discussion today on game changers. It's all about your customers and not your competitors. We've got for you power-packed panelists right here, leaders from across genres, and it is such a pleasure to present to you Mr. Vipin Sondhi, Managing Director and CEO, Ashok Leyland. Let me also welcome Mr. Rajesh Ramakrishnan, Managing Director, Perfetti, Melle, India. A very warm welcome to Mr. Amit, Malik, Managing Director and CEO, Aviva, India. Let me also present to you Mr. Martin Schwenk, Managing Director and CEO, Mercedes-Benz, India. And of course, a very warm welcome to Mr. Prabhjeet Singh, President, Uber India, South Asia. Moderating and putting all these fantastic thoughts together is going to be Mr. Rajeev Singh, partner at Deloitte. So a lot to look forward to with these conversations ahead, but we are also wanting to get some questions from our audience. So please do send in your questions. I'm sure our panelists would love to take a few up. All set now. I'd now like to hand over to Mr. Singh.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Isha, for this, and really excited. Thanks a lot for having me here. And I must say that this is really a power-packed panel that we have. So, of course, without losing any time, let me just get into trying to capture the thoughts that all our leaders, stalwarts have here. Let me begin first, Martin, come to you, or rather coming to you, Martin. Martin, the pandemic that we have seen over the last maybe more than now 1.5 years has brought about some major shifts. I would call them rather as tectonic shifts in that sense. So what we would love to hear, Martin, from you is that how these tectonic shifts are changing the consumer behavior, and especially from a Mercedes-Benz perspective. I mean, how do you see the consumers experiencing the brand? How do you see them experiencing the product? How do you see experiencing the entire purchase cycle? So that is what we would love to hear from you, Martin. And how is Mercedes-Benz really trying to ensure that you capture the essence from a customer perspective?
Well, that's quite a few questions, but I think maybe let me start like this. The pandemic was a shock not only individually and collectively to the community, but also to all the business environment. And I think it accelerated extremely a lot of initiatives that were already there. And I think probably the most obvious is e-commerce activities and strategies, which in the automotive retail space, let me say in Mercedes-Benz India, we had before sold mostly, say, model cars and accessories online. We had tested some e-commerce with pre-owned cars, but then we went within a few weeks from basically 1, 2, 3, 5% of vehicle sales to new car sales of 15 to 20%. So we have seen a complete change there in the customer perception and also in the interaction with the customers. It used to be a lot of theory that customers want to go online, and we had already spoken about that almost 2 years ago and said we're setting up online platforms. But with this shock and the time in front of computer screens and restrictions that were there, it really accelerated extremely. So I think that's probably the biggest change. But I have also to say in this, whilst we were technology-wise more or less prepared, I think we had to do a lot of learning also how to do it, how to combine then the online and the offline experience, how to address customers, how to work with them, but also how to work with our dealer partners. I mean, when you start as an OEM e-commerce platform, e-commerce experience, you would traditionally maybe think now you compete with the online against the offline, the brick and mortar. But we really understood that this is not the case. If you want to have it seamless for the customer, then you cannot compete. Then you have to complement what happens online and what happens offline. And with that, we have really made huge progress in the entire customer interaction in the e-commerce space, but also in the offline space. Maybe I've later a little bit more time to talk also a little bit of how that influences then our business model in the future.
No, thanks a lot, Martin. I mean, it was wonderful listening to some of the things, and I'll come back to you, Martin, to hear a little more in terms of some of the disruptions that Mercedes-Benz is especially doing. But moving on, Rajesh, and coming to you, Rajesh, What kind of, I mean, there are a lot of shifts that people keep talking about, but what would be more interesting to also know, Rajesh, from an FMCG perspective or from overall industry perspective is this shift permanent, or are there some shifts that you think that we will go back to where we were before the pre-pandemic time? Because the way people are buying today, a lot of things have changed. But what would be interesting to know is this what you see as a trend even going ahead, or you think there will be some reversal somewhere?
Thanks, Rajeev, for that. And good morning, everybody. Thank you, ET, for having me in this panel. It's a pleasure being here with all of you. Rajeev, to your point, I think there are some fundamental shifts which happen over a period of time that get modified a little bit, but that doesn't dramatically change. So let me talk about a few trends that we are observing in the market. One is consumers' increasing propensity to look for value, and that manifests itself in multiple ways. So, for example, value could be in the form of price points, which are, affordable price points that they can buy at. So, like, for example, a sachet at 1 rupee. Now, that kind of a trend is likely to continue going forward as well. Or value could come from convenience. The fact that I'm able to get something in an easy, convenient format is also adding value. The third way they seek value is, for example, home stocking and home consumption. Because now, thanks to the pandemic, people going out has reduced quite a bit. And therefore, there is a greater tendency to stock, especially impulse categories like candies, confectionery, salty snacks at home, and therefore consume. So can we provide those value-added pack formats to consumers which can at home? So this is one specific area that we are seeing a trend in. The other trend is, it's been around for a while, but gathering momentum, especially in the pandemic times, is around health and wellness. So consumers are trying to understand, how can I, especially in the food and beverages category, what can I eat which allows me to get the right level of health and wellness to speak. So, for example, even as a confectionery category, we just launched, for example, Alpenliebe Juicifals, which contains vitamin C and fruit juice. So that 1 rupee, there is some sort of a functional benefit that we are providing. So again, looking for those benefits in terms of health and wellness is gathering momentum. The third piece, which I would say as a trend, which we are seeing, is around the fact that consumers are looking for more and more caring for the environment and sustainability. So, for example, minimize using of plastic or minimize using of energy. I think these are some of the things that are also happening around. So these, I would say, are a few trends that we're seeing in the consumer space.
No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Rajesh, for sharing that. And glad to hear that this is not just something which is only temporary in nature. Maybe this is also something, at least in some modified form, as you said, are going to stick and going to continue. So continuing with this and coming to Vipin, to you. Now, of course, we did hear Martin talk about things from a Mercedes-Benz perspective. We heard Rajesh talk about from an FMCG perspective. But I just want to make it slightly more broader, Vipin, and would love to hear from you. How do you think this entire pandemic and the entire, the entire digitization, the focus on digitization went up significantly. But how do you think that this has put onus on organizations, not just from a customer perspective, but slightly a broader perspective, which is covering employees, covering stakeholders like suppliers and so on and so forth? So what are your views, Vipin, on that?
Thank you, Rajeev. And that's really, so much has changed. First, let me just mention customer experience now is much more than touch points. It's about emotion and it's about behavior. So it's become more and more enhanced. Not that it wasn't there in the past, but even in a hardcore product like a truck, it's a lot about emotion and behavior. And it's extremely important that customer obsession now is not just about looking outside in, but the perspective, as you rightly asked, must be applied to employees and all stakeholders and adapting to their needs, almost if they are equally as we kind of define a customer. And finally, the most compassionate solutions come from the very people who understand their customers now in the very broader sense, as you said, all stakeholders. Now, Ashok Leyland has tried to be a customer-first organization, and it's also reflected in what we call Aapki Jeet, Hamari Jeet, that we all win together. And the mindset and culture of seeing our success through the success of our customers, we try more and more and obsess with it really. Now, the pandemic has accelerated the journey, as Martin said and Rajesh said, it just accelerated the journey of digital adoption. And therefore, there's a need to drive digital adoption, both in customer experience, which we call as CX 3.0, and the employee experience strategy that elevates CX. And we are extensively leveraging tech-driven engagement platforms to get closer to our customers than before. Now, if you look at the crucial building blocks, culture goes beyond technology. It's ongoing, long-term, touches everything. So even if we think digital, then we do digital, we also have to become digital. And we have to excite our people through breakout sessions, hackathons, crowdsourced ideas, etc., both from a customer standpoint and from an employee standpoint. We look at design thinking, the customer need to empathize, to ideate, to innovate. We've got to have a robust structure for design thinking to aid innovation. Then there's a lot about digital dexterity. You know, my belief is that in IC engines took 100 years to change. And of course, Martin knows that better than anybody else. But now people change slower than technology. If IC engines change a little slower than us, but now I think technology is changing much faster than people, and therefore the need for digital dexterity. It's simply put, it's the desire and the ability to embrace existing and new technologies. So it's all about digital first. Can you fail fast and succeed faster? I'd rather somebody fail very fast rather than take a long time to fail. Reward that failure, and then we try and succeed faster by learning from it. Finally, a data-driven organization and embedding digital. So much has changed, and you're absolutely right. Customer, employee, on a par. We just have to go through the emotion and the behavior. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Vipin. You just changed and brought us back, saying that don't think of the customer as only the end consumer, but think of all the internal customers as well. And as I heard from you, as I heard from Rajesh, as I heard from Martin, I got reminded of one very powerful statement, which said that there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks and months where decades happen. I think that is what we were experiencing over the last few months. It feels like almost a few decades have happened in sense of transformation. Moving on, Prabhjeet, and let me come to you, Prabhjeet, with a slightly different one and more from a perspective that we have kept hearing you as on various media talking about it. Is all this digitization, all this change is also giving and lead to a lot of opportunities from a perspective of different business models that we see evolving. So what are your thoughts from a perspective of what kind of new business models are you seeing at Uber come in? And if you can give us a little peek in terms of some of these new opportunities that you would like to tap into from an Uber perspective.
Absolutely, Rajeev. While the pandemic is a once-in-a-century health crisis and a humanitarian crisis, it has also meant that each one of us has had to innovate very rapidly and bring in agility in how we operate. I think from a mobility perspective, this is a sector which has seen a massive shift, largely because instead of encouraging people to step out, we were encouraging 18 months back people to stay back and step out only when required. I think there are three big shifts which we are beginning to see, which are creating opportunities for digital first players like us. One is there is a genuine shift in new use cases which are beginning to emerge. We heard Rajesh speak about home consumption from FMCG perspective. From a mobility side, we are seeing while people are beginning to work a lot from home, which means the commute use case is recovering slower. We're also seeing recovery in cases like people wanting to take the same Uber with the vehicle and the driver and take it for a multi-city trip or keep the vehicle with them for multiple days. And suddenly it creates an imperative for people like Uber or other ride-sharing platforms to pivot much faster. So that's one aspect which we are seeing. For example, our intercity business is seeing recovery levels which are much faster than some of the core intracity business. The second opportunity has also been when the pandemic hit. It was imperative that we are all able to turn up to support the cities, to support our consumers, in our case, both riders and drivers, and to be able to partner with local governments where possible. I think this is what also led to business opportunity. For example, when the country started moving last April, May, we were able to very quickly pivot our existing tech and supply infrastructure to do a few things. One is, we started partnering with other big box retailers, traditional e-commerce, traditional players who wanted to compete with e-commerce players, and partnered with them to be the last mile provider. This allowed us to create an earning opportunity for our driver partners, at the same time helped big box players be more competitive with e-commerce players. The second thing we realized, if people are not necessarily moving, they still need to be able to send objects from point A to point B. So we introduced a service called Uber Connect, which is now scaling very dramatically, even as the pandemic hopefully is subsiding. And the third is, we realize that while our core user base may be actually at their homes, but there are still essential workers which need to travel. So we were able to, over a 96-hour period, based on feedback from multiple other stakeholders like those on the call, set up a Uber Medic service to be able to transport, at that point of time, essential workers to healthcare workers. And interestingly, that has now become a service line which has extended beyond that in that period. And the third thing which we are seeing is, there are few shifts which are now permanent, or this is the new normal, and we are trying to adapt the same technology and infrastructure to support those. So for example, as people begin to come back to work, which is beginning to happen across the board, there will be a very high premium and expectation for the employer to provide safe commute options to encourage people to come back to work. And thereby we have been on standby to launch our corporate shuttle service, which takes the same convenience, safety, and affordability standards which Uber is known for, and deploy it for a very different use case. So again, there are a portfolio of such bets which we are pivoting to. And I do believe that it allows us to not only capture new revenue pools, but also create more earning opportunities for driver partners who obviously were impacted quite significantly in the pandemic.
Thanks a lot, Prabhjeet. I think wonderful ideas and a lot to learn in terms of how an organization like yours is kind of looking at opportunities and transform and see many more revenues in this entire pandemic. Moving on and coming to Amit. Amit, the insurance business traditionally has had, different kinds of channels. And pardon me, I'm not from that sector, but from an outside-in perspective that I see is that probably there's a channel which is of the direct agents or the agents who go speak to the customers and so on. There is, of course, a channel which is through the banks. There is a channel which is an online channel or direct to customer channel and so on. Now, how do you see this entire shift happening over the last, pandemic could have only accelerated it. I am sure that the shift was already there in place. And as we heard earlier, maybe it's the acceleration that you would have seen. So how do you see this entire shift happening from an insurance perspective? And also, if you can add on that, how do you balance? Because these are different channels that you must be experiencing. So how do you balance between different channels?
So let me start by the second part of your question,
Okay.
Rajeev, and challenge the very premise of the question, right? Because I really don't think we are in an era where we can get away by balancing anymore. I think as an organization, we really need to place our bets, and we need to place our focus bets on channels that we would want. So, like you said, yes, insurance has multiple channels, and while you did mention 2 or 3, but there are many more. I think as an organization, first step is for us to be able to place our bets and say which are the channels where we would want to place our bets on. And I'll give you an example, like you said about the digital, and sorry for the background noise. It's an announcement that we have for wearing masks at office and being safe. It'll just take another 10 seconds. So sorry, that's the constant reminder to all employees who are in office from a safety standpoint. So, if you were to look at what happened, so if I were, like you said, yes, when the world came to a stop, we were in industry which, really encountered a lot of challenge from how do we service our customers? How do we ensure each and everyone is able to renew the policy? And the first level of challenge that we had was not only to provide tools, Rajeev, to our customers, but we have our customers across age groups who like to come into a physical brick and mortar branch and do the transaction, to tell them how to digitally use the tools that we have. So one was to call up a customer and say, you can pay your premium and renew your policy in a lockdown via an EFT or card or a mobile wallet. But the other was, how do we educate them? And I think a couple of my panelists did allude to how do we educate the customers on using the tools. That was the first thing, which was across channels, whichever customer you were. But coming back to your balancing of the channel, if I was to take an example and say, if I was to look at the new customers, so if I was to focus on my, new generation customer, which is 25 to 35, coming into the workforce, has, mass affluent category, earns between
between 6 lakhs to 30 lakhs find in digital. The bets that I would have to then do is focus the organization energy towards that to say, how do I get the best product that I can sell online? How do I get the best customer experience and innovate from an end-to-end purchase journey standpoint? How do I build a seamless self-service model after I've sold the insurance, right? And then focus my resources there. So I think that whole clarity from an organization standpoint as to which channels to focus on, which bets, has started to redefine in the post-COVID pandemic era. I think gone are the times when you would want to be everything for everybody in the customer. I think all of us in insurance will now start to focus on looking what customer segments we want to. So, so I typically define that as 3 segments. One is the ask. So the customer segments who have an ask of you, and how do you fulfill that ask? The third is the ability, where you encourage people to be able to make them able or provide ability for them to use your services. And third is not for me segment, where you define and say, no matter how lucrative I'm going to be, this channel or this segment is not what I'm going to focus on. And I think those demarcations have become very clear.
Wonderful, Amit. Completely different perspectives, and very, very glad to hear the way you said focus, decide which bet you want to take, and so on and so forth. Gone is the era of trying to balance and so on and so forth. Coming back, and I know, Rajesh, since you said that you may have a hard stop because of a flight, so I'm going to come to you, Rajesh, first. And we did hear when you were talking about, you spoke about, for example, the shifts and how, from an FMCG perspective, people are trying to say probably one of the shifts you spoke about is home stocking in some manner and so on and so forth. But what I would love to hear from you going ahead is how do you see from an organization or from an FMCG perspective, personalization happening, and it's not just about selling once to the customers. From an FMCG industry perspective, how do you ensure that you remain engaged with the customer? How do you ensure that you retain the customer in some sense and form? So are there any thoughts around that, Rajesh?
Yeah, thanks, Rajeev. And to ask is an absolutely relevant question. And if I were to just take on what I was sharing earlier in terms of the trends, one of the trends that we are also seeing is how consumers have now started increasingly becoming more demanding and discerning, right? And actually, in some ways, a little less forgiving. So it's very important for brands to start having two-way conversations with consumers, as opposed to, say, even 20 years back when we used to just talk about how great we are and what we can offer to consumers. So I think that's another change that we are seeing. And a related change to that is this whole consumers wanting to co-create stuff. So they also want to participate in telling brand stories, right? And I think that's a great thing. I mean, of course, it can act as a double-edged sword, because if good things are there, it's nice. But as I'm sure my fellow colleagues would in the call would agree, that if there are some not so good feedback, then it can act as a double-edged sword. But I think the credibility significantly goes up when, stuff gets co-created along with consumers, right? So I'll just give you 2 examples from a confectionery industry point of view. I think the fundamentals don't change. Whatever communication we do hinges on 3 things. 1, do we have a strong consumer insight? Is it true to the brand essence and the brand philosophy? 3, are we making it contextual in terms of occasion and what is happening around us, right? So these 3 things don't change irrespective of the medium of communication. And if you get these 3 things right, the level and quality of engagement significantly goes up. So let me give you an example of Alpenlibe Just Jelly, right? It's a jelly product. So the insight is that, families like to come together and do stuff which is fun for them, right? The brand philosophy is the brand enables families to have fun times together. And one of the insights or the context that we leverage is, historically, jelly has been used in various product formats to create nice desserts in our house, right? So what we've done is, we've created this concept of Alpenlibe Just Jelly dessert recipes. So we encourage consumers to get together as a family and create dessert recipes. It keeps them busy when they are sitting at home during COVID times, makes them have fun, keeps the kids engaged. It is an habit which has existed in the past, so it's not something new for them. And as a consequence, they get to eat some nice desserts. The first step we did was take in some celebrity chefs like Amrita Raichand and so on, who can then bring a little bit of salience to it and create some excitement around it. The second step was co-creation, actually asking consumers to create those recipes, send it to us, and celebrate and recognize the recipes created. The third step of gratification actually is to put those recipes on the pack itself, right? I mean, that's the biggest high that a consumer can get, seeing my recipe on a pack which goes to hundreds of thousands of houses. So I think this whole thing of engagement, thanks to digital platform, we can take it to a completely different level. I'll just give one more example and then I'll stop there. Like Center Fresh is all about fresh breath confidence, right? So one of the things that happened was the gum sales dramatically dropped during the pandemic because nobody was interacting with each other in a social context, right? Unfortunately. But however, the insight that we hit upon was that even though we are wearing a mask and sitting at home, or even when you are wearing a mask when you're going out, our breath could not necessarily be fresh behind the mask. So we can feel it, which say some other people are not able to feel. So we came up with this whole idea of eat Center Fresh for yourself so that your breath stays fresh and you stay fresh behind the mask, right? So it had a social message, but yet it was true to the brand promise, and it was leveraging a local contextual thing of the pandemic. And as a result, actually, we managed to reverse this drop in sales of gums. People were happy, and we got a few influencers in the social media to talk about it and give it a little bit more impetus. So I think that larger point I'd like to make is definitely there are opportunities. Brands would do well to stick to fundamentals because those don't change no matter what the environment is. Strong insight, stay true to the core essence of the brand, leverage contextual situations. Those three don't change. But can we still be creative? Can we still leverage technology to come with ideas that are a two-way engagement with consumers as opposed to the brand telling them how good they are? So that's really what I would like to share. Thank you.
Awesome. Rajesh, I think some of the brands that you recalled out here, all of us relate to all those brands or all those categories that you have, and the kind of ideas that you shared were absolutely phenomenal. Thanks a lot, Rajesh, for getting those ideas. If you can continue, Rajesh, nothing like it. I'll come back to you. I know that you said that you have a hard stop, but I'll keep moving on. Martin, let me come back to you, Martin. We did hear earlier when you spoke about, but what I would love to also hear from you, Martin, is that we keep talking about digitization. We have heard, say, from Mercedes-Benz that you are going direct to customer, and that's a big shift because the entire passenger vehicle industry so far, at least in India, was all through the dealership route. And going ahead, a lot of things are changing. But how do you see the human element come in? Do you see that the role of that human touch, the human element, somewhere changing, or do you think that it will still be relevant? Do you think so? What is that from a future of retail perspective? How do you think the entire journey is going to shape up, Martin?
Yeah, I would want to spend a few minutes first on when you talk about direct to customer, because I would want to say clearly that doesn't mean you go e-commerce all out. Yeah, I mean, if we all can agree that we live in a time of transformation and disruption, and when you look at the classic retail business of motor cars, of vehicles, then of course you think one disruption is the e-commerce way. But the other way is also to look at what the customers actually want. And we have had already several colleagues in the panels talking about convenience and say customer experience. And I would want to add, we know from the online experience, for example, that customers look for transparency, very much for transparency. They have in online all transparency. They see prices, they see inventories, and they have convenience. So if we want to be successful with the brick and mortar retail, we have to provide a similar customer experience. I cannot dream about seamless online, offline, or omni-channel if I'm not doing the same in the showrooms. And so what's happening at the end in our transformation is what we call retail of the future, is moving to a world where the dealership has the same role as it has today, to interact with the customer, to be the relationship in the relationship, because specifically in luxury, a lot of it is still based and will be based on human interaction. So it is about explaining products in the showroom whenever it doesn't happen online. It's about test drive. It's about delivering a vehicle. I mean, it's not something you can just mail out. Yeah, so there is a lot of interactions that are necessarily happening in a showroom and at a dealership. So now with the direct to customer sale, it means the dealership, which we call in future franchise partner, is still doing exactly the same functions, but he acts on behalf of Mercedes-Benz India. He sells what we offer. He sells the prices and with the offerings we have defined. He sells the inventory we have and not the inventory that might be on the ground in the dealership. And a customer who walks into a showroom has or goes online, sees the inventory we are having for sale at this stage. And that can be cars which are anywhere in the country, that are cars that are in Pune in our headquarters, and that are cars that might still to be built in a couple of weeks. So what you get is a similar experience in the online as in the offline world in terms of price consistency and transparency. There is no hidden cost or anything. And you have at the same time transparency on inventory levels. And you have a unified brand experience as well, because a lot of that determines the brand experience. And that's further than obviously supported by now our franchise partners / dealers. They will focus to convey this brand experience to the customers. Because if you compete now one dealer against another within our brand, how do you differentiate yourself? Cannot happen via price, because that is defined from Pune. So you will differentiate yourself by the customer experience, and you will do many things. Rajesh was talking about chocolates and sweets. You will do these things at the same time as you would do it in a luxury segment. So you will focus on the customer experience and be transparent with the customer and present the brand values in a more unified way. It gives all of us, our partners and us, more information, more access also in terms of consumer insights, digital data, and so forth. So that is why if you ask me the human element, that's for sure there. It's not going to change in our business. We need it, but it will be complemented by the digital element. And then the real game changer is to make it, you read a lot about seamless, omni-channel, and so forth. But to have the business model that supports that, I will want to say proudly, I think we have one which will crack that. It's about to be rolled out in a few weeks. And I'm really curious on, because it has not been tested here in India at all by any manufacturer. And also globally, there's only a few examples. So I'm really looking forward to see what the impact is on the customers. And at the end, bottom line also how it drives our business.
Thanks a lot, Martin. I think very glad to hear that that it's something that the human touch, the human element, the human experience is extremely critical. The touch and feel, especially from a perspective of a passenger vehicle test drive, as you rightly said. So it's all a question of how do you ensure that while you continue to do that, you also try and digitize in some sense and form. So glad to hear your thoughts in terms of how the future of retail is likely to change. I'm going to pick up a question from what I have seen now coming through the audience. And Vipin, pardon me, but this is a question that has come from the audience, and I thought that who better than you to come to get an answer to this. So someone from the audience is asking that today's environment is very challenging. We have distributed workforce, working largely from home, working in a distributed manner, and so on and so forth. But the need for collaborative working at the same time has gone up multifold. So how do organizations build cultures? And since you spoke about culture building earlier, Vipin, I thought, why not I come to you with this? So the question is, how do you build a culture of collaborative working within the employees and also with the larger stakeholders while you're still distributed in terms of working?
Yeah, I covered some of it earlier. Really, it is the biggest challenge. And at the end of the day, we remember it's all about people. Technology is an underpinning, but at the end of the day, we are all emotional, behavioral, and we need social connects. And that's extremely important. What we've got to ensure is that people are engaged at every point in time. People understand that the organization is empathetic towards them, and people understand that the organization cares about them. People understand that their skills now, and I'll just focus on that aspect, that the skills in this day and age need to change and need to change rapidly. That we will not be looking only to get an external talent, but be building skills of the existing people. And I think upskilling and reskilling of resources is a great way of building a positive culture in terms of what people care. And that's the whole thing is about, essentially exciting people. Now, when you look at a large organization like ours, we can have a micro startup or an edge organization. What we've tried to create, let's say for an electric vehicle for Ashok Leyland, is a completely new entity, which is going to function like a startup and will focus on electric vehicles, bread, butter, jam, sleep, eat, everything is only going to be electric. So you build a culture there of a startup with a set of people who are only going to look at the future. Similarly, we're looking at digital solutions for customers who participate through the entire life cycle of the usage of a truck. So you sell a truck, but that's only 10%. You service a truck, maybe 25%, but 75% opportunity is there. So we build another edge organization that will float on its own, which will have its own people. So we're trying to build a culture of a startup, of young people having an opportunity to innovate. We've also launched an innovation pipeline to encourage executives to rekindle their curiosity, collaborate, come up with real-life innovative solutions to business problems. And the company would then evaluate and nurture the ideas to achieve scale. And finally, I think our young people want to have a purpose. So we have a vision, and the vision is, let's say, to be the top 10 in commercial vehicle players. But then it's all about sustainable development goals. And the question is, how can we ensure that we are looking at the right things, that everything we do is sustainable? It's not the sustainability champion's job. It is my job. And I won't do it at 4 p.m. in the evening before going home. It will be that all right through, whatever I do will be sustainable. And one small change amongst tens of thousands of people can make a huge difference. So you build a culture accordingly, but there has to be a purpose, and young people are driving us towards that, Rajeev, like never before. Back to you.
Thanks a lot.
Rajeev, can I just add an element?
Yes,
to what
yes, I was
said?
just coming to that, feel free. I mean, feel free to add in, because
I just wanted to add
some audience.
One more element, because, if you look at the question which said about people being dispersed and in this whole COVID, work from home kind of a situation, I think all that Vipin said is absolutely relevant. The key element, one more, is about psychological safety. See, we know people are insecure. We know people are afraid. We know there is a lot of anxiety because of, dispersed workforce, about how performance would be measured. How would the company look at me? How's my contribution being viewed in this whole new virtual cycle? So I think that psychological safety from an organization standpoint as to how we set that up, and that will be the key to the success of this. And it comes in two ways. It comes first from a two-way communication about it's okay to be afraid, it's okay to be anxious, it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to fail. I think that's the first part of how we communicate and set the tone right at the top. It starts from the CEO's office and goes down. And the second is about empathy that you need to have, because the way we work has changed. And empathy towards people's constraint of whether it's space, whether about bandwidth, whether about timing, all of that is going to be one of the rocks that on which we will build a culture as we go forward. So just wanted to add that point of psychological safety here.
No, perfect. And thanks a lot, Amit, for adding it. I'm going to ask you another question which has come from the audience. And this is specifically to your business, Amit. There's someone who wants to know that in your business, and probably this is an assumption, but maybe it's probably right as well, that it's like a transaction. You get customers and kind of probably get them to do life insurance and so on. But is there some things, or are there some things which are changing to kind of remain engaged with the customer for a longer duration, rather than just having them onboarded onto a program once? So is there something changing from a life insurance perspective to stay engaged?
A great question, whoever asked. I think that's true. So, in the old days of insurance, you would have 2 or 3 touch points with the customer in a year. Once you onboarded the customer, then you called the customer at the end of 1 year and said, sir or ma'am, would you please pay the premium? Or, if the customer had a query, and it was more customer led. I think in this whole post pandemic, we have as an industry gone back and started to have touch points which are 2 to 3 times in a month rather than 2 to 3 times in a year. And that has changed from the need to educate the customer. Also from a customer ask standpoint. So, today, if the customer has, we are looking at nominees of the customers and saying, do you have a nominee in your life insurance policy? God forbid something happens to you. So are we making you more safe? That gives us a touch point, to reach out to the customer and say, are you safe? Are you being able to renew your policy? Rather than doing a 30-day callback, 30-day prior callback, you're starting to do a 90-day callback so that, the customer is more aware. So we are looking at those touch points which are absolutely there. We are looking at touch points even from educating the customer. I don't know how many of you know, but we took this whole mantle to say, before we sell insurance, and if someone buys insurance, whether they buy from Aviva or anybody else in the market, we need to educate people as to have the importance of why you should buy an insurance, or what does an insurance mean, the difference between an endowment and a traditional and a ULIP and a term. So if you have Alexa at home, just go and say Alexa Aviva and ask us about Aviva, and we will tell you about how to educate you on what is endowment, what is ULIP, and it doesn't mean you have to be a customer. Right. Similarly, we've engaged with our customers to understand the potential of their kids and what the kids would need to build a career from a tool called a Kidoscope. Now that's free. That is free for anybody to use. You don't have to be our customer. But the idea is, how do we engage with people at large and enhance the literacy of why you should have an insurance? And then the step comes in, if you like our products, please buy our product. If you don't like our products, please buy anyone else's product, but buy insurance. I think that's the message that we want to spread. So we are constantly engaging on that.
No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Amit. And I'm sure the person would have got a lot of insights. There's another question, and I'm just going to keep going fast because I'm finding a lot of questions coming in. Prabhjeet, I'm going to come to you with this question, but anyone, please feel free to add in. The question is that, and Prabhjeet, the reason I'm coming is because you did speak about different business models. You did speak about new things happening and so on. The question is, what are the factors organizations should keep in mind while designing customer journeys for the post-pandemic world?
I think that's definitely something which each of us is grappling with on an evolving basis. The reality is the consumers' own requirements are changing on a regular basis. I think there are 2 or 3 key themes which are relevant, I would imagine, not just for our category, but broadly. One is, it is super important to make sure that we design for consumers not for a transaction, but for a relationship. This is a big shift which needs to happen. In fact, the pandemic has forced many consumers, in our case, whether it be rider or driver, to really think hard of why they want to be with one platform or one player versus the other. So I think that's going to be one critical part. So how do we think of going beyond relationship in building loyalty, in building relationships on things which are beyond just economic value of the transaction? The second thing, which is super important, is also to make sure that we provide comfort and confidence that there is a full cycle view to any call we take. I think that's true for multiple businesses. The pandemic is still not fully receded, which means there is also a likelihood that there could be multiple other waves, which could mean to dramatic changes. But can we stay with our partners? In case of FMCG, I would imagine that's the dealerships. But in context of our business, it's about the hundreds and thousands of driver partners. And how do they know that we will have their back even when, for a period of time, mobility business may get impacted? And the third core underlying theme, as we think of any consumer journey, is going to be truly recognizing that consumers' preference will keep adapting. And thereby, are we failing fast? Are we experimenting enough? Are we co-creating solutions with consumers? I think that is a must-have. We heard of some great examples earlier from Rajesh talking about putting consumers in the front of the packages, etc., or the mouth freshener, etc. I'm sure those require co-creation and insight generation on an ongoing basis. One of the prime examples which we are dealing with is how do we ensure that our drivers on the platform, who are also consumers, recognize the value of vaccination, not just because it makes them safe and healthy in this environment, but will actually help them grow the category further. Because if we can have majority of drivers vaccinated, more consumers will come back to the category faster. So I think it's a continuous inciting which you need to then co-opt the consumers into.
Thanks, Prabhjeet, for that. And Vipin, Martin, would you like to add anything on the customer journey that the question came on factors?
I'm happy to add. Really, it's seeing how do we get our customers really interested in a truck, for example, not the most interesting category in the world, but how do you get interesting? So we have now what we've launched is a modular truck platform. So you can actually, like a Lego block, as soon as we are able to convey this concept, create your own truck with a product configurator. So the customer can actually have the flexibility to build the vehicle as per his or her needs, depending on the applications. You don't go and buy a truck of a certain tonnage. You actually configure the fuel tank, you actually configure the span, you configure how you want it to be for the specific this thing. It can be fun as well, but it makes it easier right across the value chain for the plant, suppliers, etc., to know exactly what is coming. So it's all about engagement, as a lot of our colleagues have said. How do you engage the customer and actually custom build even something like what we make? Back to you.
Fantastic.
I
Martin.
maybe add here, I mean, let me say it like this. We have heard all the keywords in this session already, I think. And that's the keywords we drive across industry, everyone here. So customer journey, we've heard all keywords. The key element at the end is the delivery. The concepts you can read anywhere, you find in any presentation. It's very easy to source the idea. The question is how to deliver on it, how to make it happen. And there the world is really vast. There's very basic things. For example, in the past we used to have phone numbers on our adverts and expect people to call. People don't want to call anymore, but if there's a WhatsApp QR code, you get response and can go into a live chat. So it's very simple things. Sometimes on the other end of it, we all amass customer data. Then the question comes about how do we utilize these data at the same time protecting customer interests? But how do we use customer insight? How do we work with this data? Because the use case is there, and to roll them out and to bring them on the road, or literally on the road for us at least, is not always obvious. And so the real thing is to having an organization who is capable of doing that. And I think that's for us in our role, I'm sure, is for all of us one of the biggest challenges actually to enable the people and the organization at the end to deliver against the fabulous ideas all of us and our teams have.
So thanks a lot, Martin, for that. And I'm just going to, Isha, allow me if I can take one last question from the audience. And this question is related, I think, in some manners to what we heard. But and this is applicable, I think, to all the businesses. The question is about a lot more data is getting generated across businesses. I mean, be it automotive, be it life insurance, be it FMCG, and so on. How are organizations looking at monetizing this data? So that's the last question I'll take, Isha. I know we are running out of time, but I would like to hear, or love to hear the views from all of you in terms of how are organizations trying to look at monetizing this huge amount of data which is getting generated. In any order, I'm not calling out anyone.
Well, I think again what we said before. Maybe I start. It is about you have to create a customer benefit with the data. And I would want to also say again, we need to be careful with customer data and protect the data at the same time. So it cannot just be, how can I say, creepy or abused. So it needs to be suitable and sensible to the customers. But the number of use cases, as we call them, are obviously huge. I mean, if you take for example, from a car manufacturer, there is a lot of cases which can be based on, the mileage of cars that have driven. You can offer dedicated, say, programs. So if a car should come to service, you can trigger that. You can offer at this time of, you can after, say, duration, someone holds a car for 3 years, you can trigger a repurchase. So there's many things in which you can interact with the customers. So there's not one case, there is zillions of ideas. And again, what I said earlier, it's about finding the right ones and delivering on them.
Thanks, Martin. So you brought both the perspectives, saying that yes, there are a lot of lot of use cases, but at the same time, you need to keep data privacy in mind. Prabhjeet, Vipin, Amit.
No, Rajeev, we're happy to go. Really, we've got to make sure that the customer is protected at all points in time. But when you look at it from our point of view, the financier actually finances a vehicle to a customer. He or she needs to know what the health of the vehicle is during the entire period. And we have the capability through what we call the iAlert or the Uptime Solution Center to be able to track 100 data points at every point in time of each truck that is being sold. Now, the question really is, how do you protect customer privacy and how do you ensure that others who would need this data can utilize it? And that journey of monetization, I think we've still to cross. We will cross it, but we'll ensure that we are extremely correct about doing that.
No, thanks a lot, Vipin. I completely understand and can relate that from a commercial vehicle perspective, uptime of vehicles probably is the most important parameter for the customers, and health of vehicle and what can he do to ensure that the breakdowns are minimum probably is a huge play. Sorry, yes, Prabhjeet?
I was just saying that, I come from a very regulated industry, and for us, customer data is like next to God. Right? And I'm sure it's for all of us. But I think two things that are there that data brings in. Right? Martin said that Martin gave very good points about how we do it. I think two things are, first, I think for us, it's about how do we use the data to ask once. If you have the data, you don't have to go to the customer and ask the same question multiple times. And how do you build that culture in the organization to say, ask it once and then refer to what you have, whether it's with our partners or whether it's with us, it's an extension. So that's the one. And second, I think from a data security standpoint, with so much of data, the whole cybersecurity risk has now moved from the table of the IT head to the table of the CEO. It's become an organization focus rather than an IT leader focus. And I think that's the big change that we all have to be aware of and make sure that we drive that within the organization. So those are the 2 points.
Thanks, Amit, for getting that last perspective, completely different perspective. No longer a mandate of the IT, it's the mandate of the CEO now. Yeah. Yes, Prabhjeet.
I'll keep it brief, Rajeev. I think data is obviously the heart of what we do as a consumer brand. I think the 2 core themes for me is how do we use data which is aggregated and anonymized to improve consumer experience. We are able to understand that, for example, are there parts of the network which are undersupplied, oversupplied? Are there consumers which are not getting fulfillment in specific pockets? And that will help you make business decisions, which eventually helps the consumer. And the second core is how to, in the post-pandemic world particularly, use data very thoughtfully, selectively to overall increase the health and hygiene standards on a platform. So for example, one of the biggest challenge for us was, how do you ensure that when a consumer, which is a driver and a rider, are interacting, all of them are following the safety standards, for example, masks, etc., in a vehicle. And we were able to then build an AI-led tool which would encourage people from time to time, trigger a selfie, which then is evaluated to figure out whether a mask is on or not. And if there's a repeat pattern of behavior which is not acceptable, we are able to then take relevant actions on either side of the platform. So again, data selectively used can be a big game changer. But as everybody said, we have to be thoughtful on we collect only what is basic, which is anonymized, aggregated, and used to actually improve the overall consumer experience.
Perfect. Thanks, Prabhjeet. Really wonderful talking to all of you. I think we are a little extended over time. Isha, back to you. Thanks a lot to all of you. Isha?
Thank you so very much, Mr. Rajeev Singh, for really bringing out such fantastic thoughts from our panelists. And a big thank you to Deloitte, our knowledge partners. I'd once again like to take this opportunity and thank Mr. Sondhi for sharing his views on us, on how you are really creating the right balance in capturing customers. And of course, a big thank you to Mr. Malik, who made sure that each one of us believe and reiterate the fact of how psychological safety is so very important today, and the way one is really working has changed. So we need to change with that. Mr. Martin Schwenk for sharing with us how important data production and customer privacy is. And of course, Mr. Singh reiterating the fact how data selectively has to be used. I'd like to thank Mr. Ramakrishnan too, who had to leave earlier because of a flight, but it's been a pleasure having all of you here. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you, ET, and thank you, Deloitte. Thank you, Rajeev. Well done.
Rajeev, thank you. Thank you. Bye. Thanks, Rajeev.
Thank you. Thanks.
And once
Well
again,
done.
like to encourage all our audience members to continue sending in such amazing questions that you did for our panelists right here. Up next will be a very interesting fireside chat on successful digital innovation initiatives. But before we introduce our speakers, please don't go visit our partner booths. Our partners are looking forward to meeting you. Our presenting partner, Intel plus Oracle, our co-presenting partner, JP Morgan, co-powered by partner, Brilio and Connect, our cybersecurity partner, Process IT Global, our gold partner. I'd like to thank Clear from the makers of ClearTax. I'd also like to thank our associate partner, HCL Technologies and Goldstone Technologies. Do visit our startup partners too in the startup zone. So a lot of excitement. In the next few minutes, we present you our fireside chat speakers.
Can data inspire us to achieve what once seemed impossible? We believe the potential of a data-driven world is infinite. Oceans of information processed in the blink of an eye. Novel approaches to intractable challenges. Insights that fuel breakthrough innovation. Previously undreamed of results. It's all in the data. The possibilities are endless. Researchers identify cures for cancer. Agrobiologists create smart hives to provide food security for the planet. Aid organizations deliver relief faster. Scientists mitigate climate change and utilities provide safer, cleaner energy. New business models build entirely new industries. It's in the data. In a cloud-enabled world, machine learning combines with human ingenuity, and the possible becomes achievable. At Oracle, we help people find the value in data so that they can achieve the extraordinary.